for miles and miles away.
Is this what's going on here in Colorado Springs? A terrorist attack?
Is this just the first in a wave of potentially deadly detonations?
They found 104 sticks of dynamite under the railroad bridge.
Were they going to blow up the train?
Lieutenant Joe Kenda is on a desperate search to uncover the truth before disaster strikes again.
How dare you?
A bomber is probably the most dangerous criminal. He doesn't care who he kills. Anytime you decide to take a course of action that your heart tells you is wrong, listen to your heart. Don't do something that you would be sorry for the rest of your life.
Things are quieting down for the night in the west side neighborhood of Old Colorado City. In a house on North 24th Street, David Hughes and his son are settling in for the night.
Dave Hughes and his son are at home.
Can I watch the show, Dad? Please, I want to record it.
There's a rock concert getting ready to come on TV, and son's pretty excited.
Not into rock music. My wife and I are very much into classical music.
All right, simmer down now. We can watch it.
Yes!
So they were just listening to music and enjoying the evening when all of a sudden...
Whoa, cool!
When the huge explosion took place, at first he thought it was part of the concert, but it was a very big explosion, and I could tell it wasn't.
Stay here. I'll be right back.
From a distance, David Hughes sees the smoke and wreckage left by the blast.
The explosion blew out the wall of the bank. There was damage done to at least one car. This wasn't an accident in any manner, shape, or form.
Across town, a young homicide detective is paying his dues, working the night shift.
I'd only been in investigations for a year and a half, so I did a 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift that nobody really wanted.
With what, Tony? It's Kenda.
The dispatcher called me and said the fire department was on the scene of an explosion at an FDIC-protected bank.
Typically, a homicide unit wouldn't be called to a bank explosion, but there was information obtained that there might be a night janitor working in the bank at the time who was unaccounted for.
People believed that they were going to find human remains under the rubble.
Okay, I'm on the way. Time to wake up, Tony. Looks like we got something.
Okay. When we got to the scene, barricades had been set up by the police department to keep onlookers away from explosive remains. It's an enormous hole. You could walk through this hole. So is this a bank robbery and the method of entry is an explosive? The damage to the exterior wall would indicate that someone is gaining entry into this place.
It was almost like a movie scene where somebody wants to rob that bank and they're going to bomb the building to get inside.
How you doing?
Detective?
You know if these guys got into the vault?
Not yet. The bomb squad hadn't reported back yet.
Let's go take a look.
Yes, sir.
There's a massive effort underway to find physical evidence, and they literally sift, leaving things behind on top of the screen that can be examined.
You're sifting to find out exactly how the bomb was made, possibly what type of components were used, and even maybe what type of explosive was used.
Detectives, gentlemen. You know if there's any victims yet?
Not yet. The branch manager said the custodian works every other weekend. Doesn't know if he's working this weekend or not.
All right, talk to the bank manager, get the custodian's home address. Let's send someone over. Maybe he made it home before this thing went off.
Yes, sir.
While the other officers try and track down the missing janitor, Kenda moves in to learn more about the explosion.
You smell that?
There was a very acrid chemical smell. In fact, even irritating to your eyes.
It's dynamite. Nothing else in the world smells like that.
They could immediately tell from the odor in the air that this was a commercial explosive, i.e. dynamite. Military ordnance has a different odor.
So it wasn't stolen from Fort Peterson or Fort Carson?
Definitely not.
Well, that's certainly helpful. I'm sure there's no shortage of that stuff in town.
There are many places that utilize explosives in routine work. The mining industry is the most common example, particularly in Colorado, where there's hard rock mines still active to this day.
Any idea where it came from?
Can't be for sure just yet, but we are trying to figure out how much was used here.
Right.
And take a look at this.
Those guys discover fragments of a timing device. When the minute hand strikes, it causes an electrical impulse to go to a blasting cap and kaboom. The only reason for a timing device is to allow escape for the bomber. We're not dealing with an amateur. This is someone who really understands explosives and how to use them.
You need to know a little bit about explosives to detonate a bomb. Amateur bombers end up blowing themselves up.
This limits the pool of potential suspects dramatically.
Anything else?
Yeah, a bit of bad news. It appears the manufacturer of this didn't put serial numbers on it.
So it can't be traced.
I'm afraid not.
Let's check out the bomb.
With the bomb squad's findings in hand, Kenda heads to the vault to see what the thieves made off with.
Upon view of the interior of that bank, the bank safe vault door was absolutely intact and untouched.
Yeah, I don't see a scratch on it.
I don't either.
As far as we can tell, the vault wasn't touched.
Maybe there wasn't time. What about the tellers? Were those drawers hit?
Let's go see. There's money right out in full view. Who wouldn't have grabbed that?
Well, either there wasn't enough time, or they're the worst robbers in history.
None of the registers had been tampered with. It didn't look like robbery was a motive.
Wait a minute. Maybe we're barking up the wrong tree.
If you're going to blow up a bank and you don't intend to rob it, what is the purpose of your effort?
One potential answer to that question sends chills down everyone's spine.
Back in the late 70s, there was some terrorism acts going on.
There were certainly incidents involving the use of explosives by terrorist groups. They were domestic in nature. They were relatively small. Their thing was anarchy and, capitalism is evil.
So you're wondering then, is this what's going on here in Colorado Springs? We're being attacked by a fanatical group that's out to bomb our national banks?
There's an awful lot of military around here. Colorado Springs would be a prime target for some of the political agenda.
We all started looking at each other like, what if this is just the first one?
At this point, the threat level is very high. If we're looking at terrorism, is there other potential targets? We have to be on heightened senses of alert here to find out what's going on.
CSPD sends emergency surveillance units to major landmarks in the city to keep watch throughout the night.
Can you see radio?
Yeah.
So we start checking calls for service in the general part of the city.
Dispatch, has there been any calls of note on the west side tonight?
Units are searching for 3 men who robbed a grocery store at gunpoint, 8 blocks northwest of your location.
8 blocks? Dispatch, what time was this robbery?
The panic button was triggered at 9:06 p.m.
That's 7 minutes after the bank explosion.
Yeah.
10-4, Kenda out. I want you to stay here. I'll head to the grocery store.
You got it.
News of the nearby robbery shifts Kenda's attention away from the domestic terrorism theory and towards a more practical motive behind the bombing.
What if they decided to set off this bomb to draw the police to the bank location?
This could be a diversionary tactic. so that these individuals could rob the store and not be worried about an immediate police presence.
If that is true, it absolutely worked, because every police officer on the West Side was at that bank. Is this just a coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences. We're investigating a bank bombing, which initially we think could be a robbery or even a case of domestic terrorism. Then we discover there's been a major robbery a few blocks away within minutes of the explosion. Could this explosion just be a diversion for the armed robbery?
Determined to find out if the two crimes are linked, Kenda heads to the grocery store that was the target of the robbery.
Is there anything else you need to tell me?
Not that I can think of.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me exactly what happened?
There were these two guys. They both had Halloween masks on. Good evening. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you?
Very well. Is that everything for you today?
Everybody get the down! Get down! Get down! What are you doing back there? Get down!
Grocery stores in 1978 commonly received a great deal of cash from customers, much more so than they do today.
Keep that head down!
Because credit cards were not in common use. So they present a tempting target to somebody with a gun who wants to demand money.
Let's get out of here.
They fire no shots. They're not there to hurt anybody. They're there to get the money. And they immediately run out of the business.
Am I going to lose my job over this? I can't afford to lose this job.
It's okay. No one's going to fire you.
Okay.
You're not the first one this has happened to.
Okay.
Did you happen to get a look at the car they were driving?
They weren't in a car. They ran off on foot. That way.
We need to get some guys out there right now before they get too far.
We're already on it.
All right, well, thank you. Sorry this happened.
A few hundred yards away, near Fountain Creek, officers have already picked up the robber's trail.
Footprints.
As investigators follow the footprints,
Damn it!
they actually end up walking right into the creek. Now, this is not a very deep creek, so it was obvious that whoever had left these footprints probably entered the creek, came out the other side, Highway 24. It would have been easy to have a getaway vehicle parked right there, and that's probably what happened.
Yeah, this is Thompson. We found some footprints, but we lost them.
10-4. Thompson, make sure you check in with headquarters before you leave the area. No sign detected.
I'm going to head back to the bank. Thank you.
We find no one. And in addition, the clerk is of little use in terms of his witness information. This work can be very frustrating. Most of the time, nothing works out. Particularly it's the middle of the night, you're tired, you want to go home, but here we are. That's what we do for a living.
Back at the bank, Kenda receives some much-needed good news.
We just got word. They've located the custodian and can now confirm that there were no casualties in that explosion.
Well, that's a good thing.
That's not the only positive development. The FBI has joined CSPD in the investigation.
Hey, Joe.
Hey.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.
This is an FDIC-protected national bank. A crime against the bank is a federal offense. This is now a federal investigation. The special agent in charge of this particular case is a Sam Nuri.
What about the grocery store? The robbery there? A few minutes after this? I mean, what are the odds?
Yeah, I agree. We're also kicking around the idea that it might be domestic terrorism, like the Weather Underground. But it's been over 3 hours since the explosion. Nobody's gotten any calls.
The hallmark of a terrorist event is claim of responsibility. They'll contact the press in the middle of the night so they get their message out there.
Is there anything I can do to help you guys out?
As a matter of fact, would you mind taking statements from all these rubberneckers? They might know something we don't.
Absolutely.
Back in 1978, the FBI had just a local field office here with a couple of agents. Because of their manpower shortage, they sometimes would request the assistance of, like the Colorado Springs Police Department.
So we see if there's anybody that saw a car, anybody that saw an individual running past, anyone that might have some knowledge of the explosion.
happen to notice anything unusual? Any people, vehicles leaving the scene?
Well, I heard it. I think it was guys from out there.
From where?
There are always people wandering around loose who perhaps shouldn't be allowed to wander around loose, who want to tell you that they think it was the Martians, and they probably have some sort of death ray that acts like an explosive.
Area 51? Roswell? Oh, they're not happy with us, man.
And you're standing there going, right, well, I didn't think about that.
We'll definitely look into that.
Be careful.
The trouble with opening the door to the general public is the general public tends to walk through it.
But not everyone the CSPD interviews offers up a half-baked conspiracy.
A guy by the name of Adam White, who advised that he'd just been out for a walk that evening and actually saw somebody bending down next to the wall of the bank, but didn't think much of it.
And then after like 10 minutes, the same guy came tearing past me. That's when I heard the bomb go off.
He said he put two and two together and said, that guy that ran by me is probably the guy who set that bomb.
Did you happen to get a good look at this guy?
Oh, yeah. He had a face you'd never forget.
Here is the magic bullet. Mr. Adam White saw this guy, passed him within 2 feet of him. We are ecstatic.
Would you mind coming down to the station talking to our sketch artist?
Police bring in a sketch artist, and over the next half hour, he works with Adam White to create a composite portrait of the suspect.
No, man. His eyes were bigger.
Bigger than that?
Like, big.
Okay.
You ask a witness, do you know a white male who's 5'6" and weighs 145 pounds and has a mustache? Well, yes, I know 14 guys like that. A drawing is much more effective.
Hey, detective, you might want to come look at this.
This is a joke, right?
That's what he's describing.
This is a drawing of the strangest individual I've ever seen. How could anyone look like this? At this point in this investigation, we have discovered an eyewitness who has seen the bomber, and he has produced a drawing that can only be described as bizarre. I'm looking at this thinking we thought we had the witness of a lifetime, and look at this.
And I'm not sure exactly how to say this, but how accurate is this sketch?
That's exactly what he looked like.
And you're sure?
That's the guy, man.
It looks like our suspect is somebody that just came out of a sci-fi movie.
There you go.
What the hell is that?
That, my friend, is your bomber.
I said, I think he's from Mars. What do you think? Maybe the first wingnut witness we came up with was right. He is from outer space.
Hey, Carl. Watch some of the guys circulate these around the neighborhood. See if anyone remembers someone that looks like that. Yeah, I know. Just do it.
Yes, sir.
On the upside, this drawing is so distinctive that if anyone has seen this suspect, they're going to remember it from this drawing.
You ever seen this guy before?
I didn't really see anything.
We canvass the neighborhood, but we come up empty. No one has seen our strange-looking person in our drawing on the night of the bank bombing or on any other night. Our drawing is comically worthless.
Unable to ID a possible suspect, Kenda and the feds regroup in the morning to plot a new course.
So we have a robbery and we have an explosion.
We had a meeting with the FBI and our guys. We started kicking around ideas.
Your first thoughts are, this could be a group of guys that have robbed other stores. They're probably drug addicts or whatnot, need money. If this robbery was successful, they'll probably try again.
Well, my first post in investigations was in the robbery unit. And we usually found these stick-up guys that have some sort of a pattern because they're lazy.
You said that the clerk mentioned they were wearing Halloween masks, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they found this to be successful, they may do this again and wear the same masks.
I think it's worth doing some digging around, seeing if there's been any similar robberies in the area.
Run it through Rimmon as soon as I get a chance.
Okay, guys, let's get to work.
That afternoon, Kenda scours the Rimmen database for armed robberies with a similar MO.
RIM is Rocky Mountain Information Network, which gathers information from all the local law enforcement agencies and charts different types of crimes, what's going on.
It was computer-driven, even in 1978. This was state-of-the-art technology.
Well, that was easy.
We determined in a very short period of time, same guys, same Halloween masks, up and down the Front Range, robbing grocery stores in the same way.
This is Kenda. I think I might have found the guys
At your grocery store. What makes you so sure?
Same Halloween masks.
Same MO? So do these guys typically create a diversion? Blow something up or whatever?
Well, no, that's the one problem.
The striking fact is there was no diversionary incident in any one of those other robberies. No explosion, no car fire, no other event of any kind. That, to us, was significant.
So you're thinking these guys who did the robbery are not the same guys who blew up the bank?
Strange as it may sound, yes.
So even though we don't believe in coincidences, we may have encountered one here.
A few hours later, authorities in Denver confirm that the bank job and the grocery store heist were, in fact, unrelated.
You guys a little old for trick-or-treating?
Denver PD calls because they monitor Rimmen as well, and they say, hey, we got him.
You guys have been busy.
We have them under arrest. It's the guys. They got the Halloween mask, got the guns, everything.
Hey, Blake, didn't Colorado Springs send out a bulletin about masked guys bombing banks?
That's right. Can you tell me anything about the bank bombing?
All right.
The result says we're robbers. We don't think about that.
What's more, the explosion that demolished the west wall of the bank came from a bomb with a timed detonator, something only an expert could build.
They're a group of morons. They're not smart enough to organize a trip to the bathroom. They wouldn't know how to build a bomb if you give them the directions.
All right, I'll see you.
When we report to Nuri that it's not them, absolutely not them, he said, okay, well, that's out, but now we got another thing. Could you go over to this railroad trestle where we've got some guys?
Okay.
They found 104 sticks of dynamite.
Really?
In a container under the railroad bridge at this location. Wow, okay.
I'll head over there.
This added a new twist to the story. The fact that the bomb at the bank was dynamite, it just made the case stranger and stranger. Were they going to blow up the train?
So what do we got?
Well, somebody walking by actually spotted it, called it in. It's just a box, though. There's no detonator.
So dynamite on a railroad, isn't that ATF's jurisdiction?
Yep, actually it is. They'll be here any minute.
We're all excited that maybe this is connected in some way.
But the ATF quickly determines this dynamite and the dynamite used at the bank are not the same.
Sticks of dynamite used in that explosion had nothing written on them, no emblems or any information. This dynamite had manufacturer's information printed on the sticks.
This explosive could not have been used in the bank robbery. Now, it's interesting that it's been abandoned under a railroad bridge, but be that as it may, it's not connected to the bank, and that's all we're concerned about at this point.
The ATF will be taking over the investigation into the cache of dynamite.
People steal dynamite from the army, from the mines, from wherever in the hopes of being able to sell it on the black market. The feds interrupted it in this case before the dynamite got into the wrong hands. But for our case, it was just another dead end.
With no leads, Kenda and the FBI are struggling to find a way forward. So instead, they go backward.
Okay, guys, this is what we know so far. Our robbery guys, there's no connection. The dynamite at the railroad doesn't match with our bomb. And our crazy bug-eyed guy, don't even get me started on that. This is where we're at, folks. I'm open to any suggestions.
Back to the original question. Why would you blow up a bank if you're not going to take any money?
We're sitting there staring at each other with blank looks on our faces, trying to decide what the motivation was for this, when it hit me.
I've got a thought. Now, hear me out on this.
The motivation has been staring us in the face the entire time. At this point in the investigation, we've been sort of tunnel visioned, but now we come up with a new theory.
Now, hear me out. Nobody died in the explosion, right? Well, maybe that's not a coincidence. And we've got a custodian that works every single night, except for one Saturday every 2 weeks. We've got a very careful bomber. Maybe he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Maybe the bank was the intended target.
Our man has a motive, and the motive is revenge.
I think when you start looking at people that feel they were wronged by the bank.
Now, who could that be? Banks always have a list of enemies because they're in the money business, and money makes emotions run high.
This could be a long list. I know a lot of people pissed off their bank.
That's true. But we only need to find the one individual who's angry enough to blow up this bank. And Kenda, you and your guys up for a little more legwork?
Absolutely. Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Detective Joe Kenda.
Oh. Nice to meet you. Please.
So we speak to the bank manager, and he comes up with quite a few people, some of whom appear to be, on the surface, quite interesting.
Scott Andrews.
Who's that?
Well, he used to work for the bank.
He was a short-term teller at the bank who was fired for being inefficient and being sort of a difficult person for the other employees to get along with.
He actually had to be physically removed from the bank. We're gonna have to let you go.
Why?
Things just aren't working out the way that we'd hoped.
When the bank manager terminated him, he had an absolute tirade.
You son of a bitch. Screw you and everyone in this place.
Scott, calm down.
Calm down? You want me to calm down? Let's take this outside. I'll show you efficiency.
Security!
He was absolutely screaming at the manager, I'm going to get even with you. I'm going to get even with everybody in this bank.
And you think he'd be mad enough to do something like this?
To be honest with you, the way things ended, I wouldn't put anything past him.
So we immediately went to see him. He admits that he's extremely angry with this bank.
Because I got fired, this is the best I could do. Actually, I'm glad somebody blew that place up.
But it wasn't you.
Of course not.
Can you prove it?
Yeah, actually I can. We can go inside and talk to my manager. He'll tell you I was here.
Let's do that.
The manager confirms Scott Andrews' alibi.
Mr. Andrews was working the night shift where they do cleanup work and get ready for the next day's business in front of several coworkers.
With Scott Andrews cleared as a suspect, Kenda wonders. Perhaps the bomber wasn't a pissed-off employee, but a disgruntled customer.
Are there customers you can think of that might be capable of something like this?
Banks are sort of loved and hated by people. On the one hand, you go there to borrow money or to, have a savings account or whatever. But on the other hand, if you run into some financial problems and the bank comes after you, there could really be a lot of animosity.
Richard Jenkins.
Okay.
Got a loan from us for a boat, a big boat. Not long after, it was destroyed in a fire. And then he stopped paying on the loan.
Well, the bank called the note. We want the money. Mr. Jenkins said, I don't have the boat. Well, that's not our problem, Mr. Jenkins. You have the money, and we want you to repay it. Well, I'm not going to do that.
Then he wrote us a letter.
What's it say?
That we are the devil's institution, and if he were that type of guy, and I quote, he would blow this place to smithereens.
Well, now, Mr. Jenkins, how interesting you would say that, because that's what somebody did.
Later that afternoon, Kenda and an FBI agent pay a surprise visit to Richard Jenkins.
Mr. Jenkins.
Yes. Now, this bombing is all over the news. So, Mr. Jenkins has a knowing look on his face.
This has something to do with the bank bombing, right?
Correct.
And the letter I wrote to the bank?
Correct again.
I said, before you say anything else, we'd like to advise you of your rights.
Do you understand these rights that I've spoken to you?
Yes.
And you're willing to talk to us about the letter?
Yes.
He was very cooperative, almost as if he was resigned to being talked to. Initially, that kind of piqued our interest.
Listen, when I wrote that letter, I was just blowing out some steam.
Some pretty strong words.
You don't understand. They're threatening to take my house away. They claimed I owed money on some boat I didn't even have anymore.
He still doesn't understand. He believes because the boat is gone, the loan is gone. He doesn't get it.
You understand how this looks, don't you, Richard?
Look, I wasn't anywhere near the bank when it blew up. I was having drinks with my wife at this bar we go to. Everyone there knows me. They'll tell you.
He gave us a lot of information, the waiter's name, the bartender's name. So we'd make phone calls to verify the story, and it checks out. Mr. Jenkins, we confirm, is in fact in this restaurant bar with his wife, talking to the bartender, with the waiter, and so on until well past the time this bombing took place.
Well, Mr. Jenkins, sorry to bother you.
As promising as Mr. Jenkins was, he becomes another wisp of smoke.
Tell the people at the bank I'll be paying their filthy money.
Fine. We recommend that you do it, Mr. Jenkins. Have a pleasant afternoon.
Treading water once again, Kenda and the bank manager decide to go through each complaint with a fine-toothed comb.
Some have a beef with the bank and they don't like the bank, but they don't have the means to necessarily build a bomb and blow it up.
Again, we're talking about a sophisticated device. We're looking not just for some irate guy. He's an irate guy that knows what he's doing.
A name pops up, Victor Shea.
Take a look at this guy.
Victor is an individual whose 19-year-old son's truck had been repossessed by the bank, and he was very displeased with that.
Here's a letter from the repossession agency we sent to seize the truck.
The note said they went to Mr. Shea's home to seize this car. Mr. Shea engaged in a violent verbal confrontation, and they left the area and did not repossess this truck at that time.
You guys sure bring out the best in people.
Sometimes people don't feel like paying the money back that we loaned them.
Do you happen to have the employment information on Mr. Shea or his son?
Looks like he works at the Colorado Mining Company. Here's his auto loan application.
If you're mining anything in Colorado, you got to blow things up. All of a sudden, this guy emerges as whoa.
Do you mind if I use your phone?
Oh, sure.
Not only is he an angry guy, he is the very first angry bank guy that has access to anything that goes bang. Victor Shea works for a mining company in Cripple Creek, Colorado. They've been around for well over 100 years. They've bought enough explosives over that period of time to blow up the entire state of Colorado.
In the 1970s, mining companies didn't keep detailed records about their stockpiles. Kenda knows it wouldn't be hard for an employee to make off with small amounts of explosives.
They maintain what is referred to as a quantity inventory, which in reality is the pile looks as big today as it did yesterday. They don't pay any attention to it.
So an employee of a company who uses explosives knows what explosives are used, how much is used in a particular day. He could steal 2 or 3 sticks at a time and not worried about being caught.
But it's not just Victor Shea's access to explosives that makes him the prime suspect. It's his recent run-in with the bank that was blown up.
If you find someone who is upset with the bank, works for a mining company, you sort of put 2 and 2 together.
Piecing this theory together, police reach out to the repo man who had the run-in with Victor and his son.
This was a truck that had been purchased by Johnny Shea, who is Victor Shea's son, with a loan he had gotten from the bank, and he had stopped making payments on the loan, and therefore the repossession company was instructed to go recover the truck.
Oh, yeah, I remember. One of the most uncomfortable situations I've ever been in.
We understand there's some sort of problem?
Yeah, there was. First of all, This kid, Johnny, he lived with his parents. The bank sent me out to their place to repossess his truck, gotten a little behind on the payments. I was about to learn why.
According to the repo man, when he showed up at the house, Johnny's truck was out front, but so were a lot of other cars.
It was all these cars. Looked like some kind of a party going on. So I get out and I go up, I knock on the door.
He doesn't like to just take a car off someone's property without them understanding why it's happening. And a woman answers the door.
Yes?
Excuse me, ma'am. I'm here to take possession of a truck owned by Johnny Shea. Apparently he's gotten a little delinquent with the payments he had on the auto loan with the bank.
What the repossession employee had no way of knowing, Johnny Shea had been killed in a motor vehicle accident where he was a passenger. The family was having a wake in the house when the repossession man knocked on the door.
Ma'am?
How dare you?
You could not select worst moment in time to attempt a repossession of the deceased's property.
I just stood there in shock and she just lit into me. And then the dad, Victor, he came to the door and he started yelling at me too.
Mr. Shea confronted the agent and told him to get off his property. He wasn't going to repossess anything.
I got out of there. I didn't take the truck or nothing. Our company sent some other guy, maybe a week later, to pick it up.
Can you imagine how awful that would be? Here you are dealing with your son's death. It's like, have some compassion.
Shea was not happy with the fact that it was actually repoed, called the bank and raised all kinds of cane with the bank. That how could they do that, and why would they come to his house and take his son's truck like they did? You can understand his displeasure with the bank over what happened.
Later that day, Kenda and lead FBI agent Sam Norrie head over to the Shea residence.
Our hope is we can get Victor Shea to confess. If he will just tell us what he did, we can put this whole case to bed.
But they're about to get more than they bargained for.
When he answered the door, we just stared at him. We couldn't say a word.
Can I help you?
He was that drawing.
Hello?
His eyes were.
All this while, we've dismissed that drawing as meaningless. And here he is in the flesh.
We're with the FBI and the CSPD. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your bank recently.
He immediately dropped his head and said, I knew you'd be coming for me. Well, okay.
What's going on?
Honey, it's... Victor, why don't you say your goodbyes to your wife?
Wait, goodbye? What did you do? Vic.
We allowed him to say goodbye to his wife. We explained to her that the FBI has jurisdiction, that he'll be arraigned in front of a federal judge, and the agents will remain in contact with her to tell her the process.
No.
It was a horrible thing all the way around. No one really wanted to be a part of this.
I'm very sorry.
We didn't handcuff him or anything. We didn't think it was necessary. And the FBI put him in their car, and we never saw him again.
What you did was wrong, but every one of us here feels for you.
There is no greater pain than the loss of a loved one. That pain can only be increased by the fact of you having to bury a child. They're supposed to bury you, not the other way around.
Are you sure you don't want to make a statement?
I'm gonna need a lawyer.
All right, Victor. Have it your way.
The FBI informed me that they tried to interrogate him and he remained silent. But truth be known, I'm sure that the repossession guy showing up took the sadness and pain away from him.
You didn't know?
And directed it into white-hot rage against the bank. I am certain that he assumed the bank knew exactly what was going on in his house, which they did not, and he therefore believed that they deserved what they were going to get. Revenge is as old as time. When people feel wronged, they want to feel right. You've given them pain, they would like to return the favor. He thought blowing up their bank and costing them many, many thousands of dollars would draw the chalkboard even somehow.
When he decided that he was going to blow up the bank, he knew that he couldn't be taking a large amount of dynamite out of his workplace all at once. So he methodically took a couple of sticks at a time until he got enough to do the job.
He constructed a device, knew how to do it. He'd routinely been around people that did it for a living.
Mr. Shea went to the bank at about 9 o'clock, went to the west wall and set that bomb up and set the timer and then ran away.
He ran past an eyewitness woman home, and within a few minutes, kaboom. He blows it up on a weekend when they're not open for business, when there's nobody in the building. It only damages the bank. He remained at his house undetected for some period of time while we investigated this case. But people get found, and people are brought to justice. It's the way the system works.
What Victor Shea did was deplorable. You know, you can't take your revenge out in a manner such as this. Thank goodness nobody was hurt.
This case has several motivators: love, hate, feeling of loss, demanding revenge. What Mr. Shea got for his trouble was a sentence in a prison and a convicted felony that's going to follow him for the rest of his days. Did it do anything to the bank? The bank is insured. The only person harmed was him.
The house on Cedar Hollow Road was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that feels staged, unnatural, as if the air itself were holding its breath. The sun had already climbed above the flat Texas horizon, burning off the last traces of fog, but inside the small wooden home, time had stopped somewhere during the night. A coffee cup sat cold on the kitchen table. Purse lay open by the door, and in the back bedroom, a bed was untouched, sheets still tight, as if no one had slept there at all. By noon, the word had spread through the town like a tremor. She was missing. No note. No signs of a struggle. No explanation. A disappearance that made no sense. And in Texas, in 1979, that was enough to turn a quiet morning into a shock that rattled an entire community. Her name was Margaret Hale, 34 years old. A mother, a sister, a familiar face at the grocery store and the local church. She wasn't the kind of person who vanished. She didn't miss work. She didn't leave town without telling someone. She didn't walk away from her family. And yet, on that day, she did all of those things at once, without leaving a trace behind. Police arrived within hours. They walked the property, boots crunching over dry gravel, eyes scanning the tree line beyond the yard. No broken windows, no forced entry. The locks were intact. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The kind of normal that makes investigators uneasy, because normal doesn't explain absence. Normal doesn't explain silence. The first reports labeled it plainly, missing person. But even then, there was a word floating unspoken between officers, something heavier, something colder. Cold case. They didn't say it yet, not out loud, but it hovered there, waiting. Margaret's husband, Thomas Hale, stood on the porch when police questioned him. Calm, cooperative, almost detached. He said he'd left early for work, just like any other weekday. He said Margaret was still asleep when he walked out the door. He said nothing seemed wrong. His voice didn't shake. His story didn't change. And in 1979, that counted for something. Neighbors were interviewed. One woman said she thought she heard a car late at night. Another said she saw nothing at all. A man down the road claimed he noticed unfamiliar tire tracks near the ditch, but by the time officers checked, they were gone, erased by traffic, heat, and time. Every lead dissolved as quickly as it appeared. Within days, the search widened. Volunteers combed nearby fields. Helicopters traced slow circles overhead. Her photo appeared on flyers on bulletin boards in the local paper. Mother of two missing, community on edge. The headlines grew louder. The facts stayed thin. There was no blood, no body, no weapon, just absence. As weeks passed, the tone shifted. The urgency faded into routine. Tips slowed. The searches stopped. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the case slipped from the front page to the archives. Another unanswered question filed away under a year and a location. Texas, 1979. Unresolved. But unresolved didn't mean forgotten, not by the town and certainly not by the family. Margaret's sister began asking questions police couldn't answer. Why was her purse still there? Why were her shoes by the door if she supposedly left the house? Why hadn't she taken her coat, her medication, her money? The answers were always the same. We don't know. There's no evidence. We're doing everything we can. Behind closed doors, something else began to form. Suspicion. Quiet, careful, unspoken suspicion. It started with whispers at the diner, with long looks when Thomas walked into a room. People noticed how quickly he returned to work, how composed he seemed, how little he spoke about Margaret after the first few weeks. But noticing wasn't proof, and in a town like this, proof mattered. Years went by. The children grew older. The house on Cedar Hollow Road changed hands. New families moved in, unaware of what had vanished there. The case file gathered dust. Detectives retired. Evidence, such as it was, sat boxed and sealed in a county storage room, labeled and ignored. Then, decades later, something happened. It didn't begin with a confession. It didn't start with a body. It began with paper, brittle, yellowed paper, and a name that had never been properly examined. A routine review of old cold cases. A new detective with time to kill. A box pulled from a shelf, heavier than expected. Inside were photographs, statements, timelines that didn't quite line up. Small things. Overlooked things. A receipt with the wrong date. A witness statement that contradicted itself. A detail dismissed in 1979 because it didn't fit the story everyone was comfortable with. The detective noticed something else too. Pattern. Not in the crime, but in the people closest to it. Family. Silence. Loyalty. Fear. And suddenly, the case didn't feel dead anymore. The phrase returned. Sharper this time. Heavier with implication. Texas 1979 cold case. And for the first time, it was followed by a new word, cracked. Not solved. Not closed. Just cracked open enough for light to seep in, illuminating something that had been hidden in plain sight for more than 40 years. Because the truth, when it finally began to surface, wasn't buried in the ground or locked away in a stranger's mind. It was closer, uncomfortably close, wrapped in blood ties and family dinners and secrets that were never meant to survive the passage of time. And as the investigation reopened, one question echoed louder than all the rest, a question that refused to stay buried any longer. What if Margaret Hale didn't disappear at all? What if she was erased by the very people who knew her best? The moment the case file was reopened, the past came rushing back with a force no one in the Hale family had prepared for. Names that hadn't been spoken aloud in decades were suddenly printed in fresh ink. Dates once considered settled were circled in red. And buried beneath layers of routine police language, a single realization began to take shape. The investigation in 1979 hadn't failed because there was nothing to find. It had failed because certain questions were never asked loudly enough. The detective started where the original investigation had stalled, the final 24 hours before Margaret vanished. According to the official record, her last confirmed sighting was the previous evening, just after sunset, when she'd spoken briefly with a neighbor while collecting mail from the roadside box. She had smiled. She had waved. She had mentioned nothing unusual. It was an ordinary moment, too ordinary, and that ordinariness had allowed it to fade into the background. But memory is unreliable, especially when shaped by shock and time. When the detective re-interviewed the neighbor, now older, slower, more hesitant, the story changed. Just slightly. Margaret hadn't smiled. She had looked distracted, nervous. She had asked an odd question, something about whether anyone else had been driving up and down the road that afternoon. A question that hadn't made sense back then. A question that suddenly mattered. The timeline was rebuilt minute by minute. Margaret had spent the morning running errands. A receipt confirmed she'd purchased groceries just before noon. She spoke to her sister on the phone in the early afternoon. Her voice sounded strained. Not panicked, but tense, as if she were choosing her words carefully. When asked later what they talked about, the sister paused for a long time before answering. Family stuff, she said. That was all she had ever said. Family. The word appeared everywhere once investigators started looking for it. Thomas Hale's work records showed he left early that day. Earlier than usual. He claimed he was called in unexpectedly. But payroll logs told a different story. No overtime. No supervisor request. Just an unexplained gap in the hours that had never been challenged. In 1979, no one had pressed him on it. Husbands were trusted. Families were private. And the absence of violence had dulled suspicion. Now, with fresh eyes, the calmness that once worked in Thomas's favor began to look like something else entirely. Control. The detective noticed something even more troubling. In the days following Margaret's disappearance, Thomas had contacted a lawyer. Quietly. Not for a declaration of death. Not for custody issues. For property advice. The house. The land. Assets that suddenly existed without their owner. At the time, the detail had been logged and ignored. Grief looks different on everyone, officers had told themselves. But grief doesn't usually come with legal planning before a funeral. As the investigation widened, the children were mentioned more frequently in the old notes. 2 of them, both under 10 when their mother vanished. Both interviewed briefly, gently, and never again. Their statements were vague, fragmented, shaped by fear and loyalty they couldn't yet articulate. One detail stood out. A mention of raised voices late at night, something breaking, something heavy hitting the floor. It was written off as a dream. The detective underlined that line twice. He moved outward into the extended family. A brother-in-law who lived nearby. An uncle who visited often. A cousin who borrowed Thomas's truck the night Margaret disappeared, or at least claimed he had. That truck had been washed thoroughly the next morning. Inside and out. Another detail that once seemed harmless. Now it pulsed with significance. Witnesses were recontacted. Old rumors resurfaced. A waitress remembered overhearing an argument weeks before the disappearance. A friend recalled Margaret confiding that she felt trapped, watched, afraid to speak freely, afraid of what she never said. Then came the photographs. Crime scene photos from the house showed the bedroom untouched. But the detective noticed something odd about the closet. The spacing of hangers. The faint outline of something large that had been removed recently. A suitcase, perhaps, or something heavier. Something that wouldn't normally belong there. He compared the photos to newer ones, taken years later when the house had been renovated. Under the new flooring, beneath layers of wood and tile, there was a discoloration in the foundation. Old, subtle, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. A request was made. Quietly. No press. No headlines. A forensic team was brought in under the guise of routine maintenance. Samples were taken. Dust. Fibers. Traces too small to matter in 1979. Technology did the rest. The results didn't scream. They whispered. Human biological material. Degraded. Inconclusive but undeniable. Enough to prove one thing. Margaret Hale had not simply walked away. The town felt it before it heard it. That old unease returned. The kind that makes people avoid eye contact, that turns front porches into places of watchful silence. A cold case was no longer cold. It was breathing again. Thomas Hale was brought in for questioning. Older now, slower, but still composed. He denied everything. Repeated his original story word for word, as if rehearsed. He showed no surprise at the new findings. No fear, just patience. The patience of someone who believed time was still on his side. But time, finally, was no longer cooperating. The detective laid out the inconsistencies. The missing hours. The clean truck. The lawyer call. The biological traces. Each detail landed with weight. Thomas listened. Nodded. said nothing, and when the questioning ended, he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and said something that chilled everyone in the room. "You're looking in the wrong direction," he said. "You always have been." It was a warning disguised as advice, because the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This was never about one man. It was about a family that had closed ranks, a shared understanding, a secret carried collectively, reinforced by silence, protected by blood. And somewhere within that family, someone had cracked long ago. They just hadn't spoken yet. Silence has a sound when it stretches across decades. It settles into floorboards, into family photographs, into the pauses between answers that never quite arrive. As the reopened investigation pressed forward, that sound grew louder, impossible to ignore, echoing through every interview room and every memory that had once been carefully sealed shut. The detective shifted focus again, this time toward the people who had lived in Margaret's shadow after she vanished. The children were adults now, lives built on fragments, childhoods shaped by an absence that was never explained, only accepted. When they were contacted, neither reacted with surprise. That alone felt like a confession of something deeper. The eldest remembered the night vaguely, a door slamming, voices rising, not words, tones, sharp, angry, then quiet, a quiet that felt wrong. He remembered being told to stay in his room, to not come out no matter what. He remembered the smell of something metallic in the air the next morning, mixed with cleaning chemicals so strong they burned his nose. He had never said any of this before. He had never been asked the right way. The younger one remembered less or claimed to, but memory has a way of resurfacing when pressure is applied. She recalled her father pacing the living room before dawn, muttering to himself. She recalled her uncle arriving early, too early, before the sun came up. She recalled being driven to a relative's house that morning instead of school, without explanation. A disruption in routine that no one ever accounted for. The detective listened without interrupting. He let the gaps hang in the air, because gaps were where the truth lived. Attention turned back to the uncle, the one with access to the truck, the one who lived close enough to arrive unnoticed in the dead of night. His original statement had been brief, cooperative, forgettable. Now, decades later, it unraveled under scrutiny. Dates blurred, times shifted, details contradicted each other, and when asked about that night specifically, his hands began to shake. He insisted he had nothing to do with Margaret's disappearance, said family was family, said he would never betray blood. The words sounded rehearsed, defensive, like a shield raised too late. Investigators pulled phone records, old ones, incomplete, but revealing. Multiple calls between Thomas and his brother-in-law in the hours before Margaret was last seen. None after. A sudden, deliberate silence that spoke louder than any conversation. Then came the financial records. Joint accounts drained slowly over time. Transfers made quietly. Property taxes paid early. Repairs done without explanation. Someone had been preparing for permanence. For a future without disruption. For a disappearance that would never resolve itself. The detective began to understand the shape of it. Not a crime of passion spiraling out of control. Not a random act. This was deliberate, contained, problem solved internally. A family decision. Pressure mounted. The town noticed unmarked cars again. Notebooks in diners. Questions that cut too close to home. Old loyalties were tested. Some held. Others fractured. One fracture came unexpectedly. A cousin. Distant enough to feel safe. Close enough to know things. She came forward quietly, asked for no protection, no attention. Just a room and a recorder. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but the words came fast, as if she'd been holding them back for years. She said there was a night when Thomas arrived unannounced, furious, shaking. She said he talked about Margaret knowing too much, about her threatening to leave, about what would happen if she did. She said another family member was present, listening, nodding. She said no one objected. She said she remembered a phrase clearly. One sentence that never left her mind. Family handles its own. The detective stopped the recording and sat back. That sentence reframed everything. This wasn't just a cold case. It was a pact. Search warrants followed. Properties once considered irrelevant were re-examined. Land owned by relatives. A remote patch near a dry creek bed. The kind of place no one visits unless they have a reason. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Soil samples taken. The ground gave up nothing definitive, just more silence, more questions. But silence, this time, was breaking down. Thomas was brought in again. This time, the tone was different. Less patience. More certainty. He was told about the witness. About the calls. About the children's memories. About the biological traces beneath the floor. He listened. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked briefly toward the mirror. "You can't prove anything," he said. The detective didn't argue. He didn't need to, because proof doesn't always arrive as a single moment. Sometimes it accumulates. Sometimes it surrounds you slowly, closing in, until denial feels smaller than the truth. As Thomas was escorted out, the detective glanced at the case file one more time. A file that once held a simple disappearance. A file that now documented a family unraveling under the weight of its own secret. And somewhere within that unraveling, the cold case was no longer asking what happened to Margaret Hale. It was asking who, exactly, had decided she would never be found. The first arrest never came. Not that week. Not that month. And in a way, that absence was more unsettling than handcuffs. The investigation had crossed an invisible line. From questions to accusations, from curiosity to threat, and everyone involved could feel it. Doors closed faster. Phones stopped ringing back. The family tightened, instinctively, like an animal sensing danger. The detective knew better than to rush it. Cold cases don't collapse under force. They fracture under patience. He returned to the evidence, not looking for what was missing, but for what had been misread. The floor samples were re-examined, this time alongside records from the original construction of the house. A contractor's note mentioned repairs made shortly after Margaret disappeared. Foundation work. Minor on paper. Unremarkable. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Repairs done before any damage was officially reported. Repairs paid for in cash. The contractor was tracked down. Elderly. Forgetful. Until the photos were placed in front of him. Until the address was spoken aloud. His hands trembled. He remembered the job. He remembered being told not to ask questions. He remembered the smell. Sharp, chemical, wrong for a simple repair. And he remembered one more thing. Thomas wasn't alone that day. Another family member stood nearby, watching, making sure the work was done quickly, thoroughly. That name went into the file in bold. The children were brought back in separately, carefully. This time, they weren't witnesses. They were survivors. They spoke with anger now, with distance. They spoke of rules they never understood growing up. Rooms they weren't allowed to enter. Topics that shut conversations down instantly. A mother who was never mentioned except in the past tense. As if she died without anyone saying the word. The eldest said something that stayed with the detective long after the interview ended. It felt like we were being raised inside a lie, and everyone knew it. Everyone except us. That lie extended beyond the house. Church records showed sudden changes. Attendance patterns. Donations made anonymously. A quiet request for prayers without names attached. The kind of gestures people make when they want forgiveness without confession. And then there was the letter. It had been sitting in an evidence box for decades, misfiled, overlooked. A handwritten note Margaret had mailed to a friend out of town just days before she vanished. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was cautious, carefully worded. But the message underneath was unmistakable. She wrote that she was scared, that she felt trapped, that she was thinking about leaving, but didn't know how, that she didn't trust the people closest to her anymore. The detective read it twice, 3 times. Each sentence tightened the noose a little more. This wasn't a sudden eruption of violence. It was a slow-burning crisis that had reached its breaking point. Margaret hadn't disappeared. She had tried to escape. An escape in this family was unforgivable. The pressure campaign intensified. Subpoenas, depositions, financial audits. The brother-in-law hired an attorney. So did the uncle. So did Thomas. Their stories remained aligned, too aligned. Identical phrasing, identical gaps. A shared script memorized long ago. But scripts fail when someone forgets their lines. That moment came during a routine deposition. A minor detail, a question about timing. Who arrived first that night? The brother-in-law hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough. His answer contradicted Thomas's statement from 40 years earlier. Not by much. Minutes, maybe. But in a case built on silence, minutes mattered. The room shifted. Lawyers leaned forward. The recorder hummed steadily, capturing the sound of a lie beginning to crack. Afterward, alone in the hallway, the brother-in-law broke. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. He asked a single question, his voice barely audible. "If I tell you what I know," he said, "does it end?" The detective didn't promise anything. He never did. He just told him the truth. It's already begun. That night, the brother-in-law didn't sleep. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, the weight he'd carried since 1979 became heavier than the fear of speaking. He requested another meeting. No lawyers this time. Just him, the detective, and a recorder. What he said didn't include a body. Didn't include a location. It included something worse. He said Margaret had been alive when they decided what to do. He said there had been an argument. That it had gone too far. That panic took over. That someone suggested an option no one wanted to say out loud. And that once it was said, no one stopped it. He said the family agreed, not in words, but in silence. When the recording stopped, the detective sat back, stunned not by the violence, but by the calculation, by the shared responsibility, by how easily love had been replaced by preservation. Charges were prepared, not announced, not yet, because one piece was still missing, the final proof, the place where Margaret Hale's life had ended. And as dawn broke over Texas once again, the ground itself seemed to wait, patient, quiet, holding on to a secret that had been buried for more than 4 decades, just beneath the surface, refusing to stay hidden any longer. The next morning, the detective returned to Cedar Hollow Road. The sun glared over the flat Texas horizon, sharp and unrelenting, casting every shadow with brutal clarity. The house itself seemed smaller now, diminished by the weight of its history. He walked the yard slowly, boots crunching on gravel, eyes tracing every detail as if the ground could speak. And in a way, it did. Traces remained, almost invisible after 40 years. Disturbed soil near the old creek bed, a patch of grass that didn't match the rest. Faint indentations in the earth, subtle enough to escape the casual observer, but loud to someone who knew to look. The detective crouched, tracing the outlines with his gloved hands, careful not to destroy what little evidence survived the decades. The brother-in-law had led him here, hesitant at first, then increasingly detailed. He described the path, the moments of panic, the decisions made in whispers, the way family solidarity had overridden morality. Every step, every word painted a picture of control, calculation, and fear. Margaret had resisted. She had screamed. She had tried to fight. But the family had moved as one, a single organism defending itself, preserving a secret that was more sacred to them than the life they had claimed to protect. Dogs were brought in, trained to detect the faintest trace of human remains. They worked in circles, weaving through the dry, brittle grass, ears flicking, noses quivering. One dog froze, pawing at the soil near a half-buried patch of roots. The detective knelt, feeling the tension coil in his stomach. Even 40 years later, nature keeps records that no human eye can erase. Samples were collected, carefully, labeled, bagged, sent to the lab. The town's collective unease deepened as neighbors watched from their porches, as if the past itself had begun to rise like smoke above the old Hale property. They remembered the whispers, the vanished woman, the children who grew into adults carrying an invisible weight. Now, those memories had teeth. They bit. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was interviewed again, separately, in rooms designed to keep voices contained. Under the pressure of scrutiny, cracks appeared. Not outright confessions. Not yet, but admissions. Inconsistencies. Slips of the tongue. Fragments of stories that didn't line up with decades-old statements. The detective recorded everything, knowing that in cold cases, it's not the loud truths that matter, it's the small, almost imperceptible ones. One evening, late, alone in his office, the detective pieced it together. Not fully, not exactly, but enough. Enough to understand that Margaret's disappearance had been deliberate, orchestrated by the people closest to her. Enough to realize that the community's sense of safety had been an illusion. Enough to know that the quietness of Cedar Hollow Road had always been a warning in disguise. Then came the phone call. A voice, trembling, almost breaking. It was a neighbor, someone who had remained on the periphery of the investigation all these years. I think I know where part of it is," she whispered. "I didn't see it happen, but I know what they did." The detective grabbed his coat, his badge, and drove without hesitation. Every mile was a countdown, every turn a reminder that some truths had been waiting decades to surface. The place was abandoned now, a small shed on the edge of property that had once been overlooked. He approached slowly, the beam of his flashlight cutting through darkness. Every sound was amplified. The rustle of dry leaves, the creak of weathered wood, his own breath echoing in the hollow space. He opened the door. Inside, remnants of a life once erased. Objects carefully hidden, arranged, preserved in a way that screamed of guilt and fear. It wasn't the final answer, but it was close. And in cold cases, closeness is a weapon, a knife edge that cuts through time itself. Every sample, every witness, every fragment of memory pushed him forward. He could feel the weight of 40 years pressing down, each year a layer of denial, silence, and complicity. And still, he pressed on, knowing that Margaret Hale's story, once swallowed by decades, was about to demand its reckoning. By the time he left the shed, the town was quiet again. But not the same quiet. There was an electricity in the air, the hum of secrets beginning to unravel. Somewhere, someone was watching, wondering if the past could really be touched after so long. And somewhere else, Margaret's name, once whispered in fear, began to be spoken in possibility. A possibility that the truth, finally, might come to light. The following morning, the detective returned with reinforcements, forensic teams, and equipment heavy enough to shake even the quietest corners of Cedar Hollow Road. Every movement was deliberate, every footprint measured. The ground, dry and cracked, bore stories that had long been ignored. Time had tried to erase them, but nature preserves what humans wish to bury. They began excavating near the shed. Small, careful sections, inch by inch, avoiding anything that could compromise decades-old evidence. The detective crouched at the edge, eyes scanning, senses taut. The air smelled of dust, decay, and something faintly metallic. He paused, listening. Silence answered, but not completely. A subtle shift in the earth, a hollow note under the spade's touch, whispered that they were on the edge of discovery. Then the dogs reacted again. Trained, precise, noses pressed to the ground. One whined softly, pawing at a mound barely distinguishable from the rest. The detective leaned closer. The soil gave way slightly under pressure. Small fragments emerged. Fibers, fragments of fabric, degraded but undeniable. They were remnants of Margaret's clothing. For a moment, everything stopped. 40 years of questions, absences, and suppressed fear compressed into a single heartbeat. The detective exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the discovery settle. The cold case was no longer hypothetical. It was tangible. The brother-in-law had been right about part of it. He hadn't said everything, but he had pointed them here, indirectly, through fragmented memories and guilt-laden hesitation. Now, evidence waited, patient, waiting to confirm decades of suspicion. Interviews intensified elsewhere. The family's attempts at solidarity were cracking under pressure. Small lies collapsed under scrutiny, inconsistencies multiplied, and the psychological burden of keeping a secret for so long began to exact a price. The detective noted the subtleties. A pause too long, a glance too quick, a voice that trembled where it had not before. These were the breadcrumbs left for those who knew how to follow them. Financial records revealed additional anomalies. Cash withdrawn in large amounts unaccounted for. Purchases of cleaning supplies and materials that, at the time, seemed mundane. Now they pointed toward deliberate, meticulous preparation. A crime executed not in haste, but in cold calculation. The family had acted as a unit, each member covering for the other, every action synchronized to erase Margaret from their lives and from memory. Back at the property, as samples were collected, the detective considered the children again. Adults now, carriers of trauma shaped by a silence that wasn't entirely their fault, yet had defined them. He wondered what would happen when they realized the full extent of what had been orchestrated around them. Would they recoil in horror, accept it as part of family loyalty, or finally, decades later, speak the truths that had been buried alongside their mother? A breakthrough came when a previously overlooked neighbor stepped forward. She had been reticent for years, afraid of the repercussions, afraid of the family's influence. But with renewed investigation, she finally spoke. She recalled the night Margaret disappeared. The faint glow of a car, two figures moving near the creek bed, muffled voices, a struggle, and the abrupt silence that followed. Not much, but enough. Enough to corroborate the physical evidence, enough to establish that Margaret had not left of her own volition, and enough to indicate a shared responsibility among those closest to her. The detective reviewed the files late into the night. Every statement, every sample, every fragment of memory aligned, pointing toward a grim, unavoidable conclusion. The family had acted to remove Margaret, and for 40 years, their silence had been the final safeguard. But decades of inattention, neglect, and technological advances had begun to unravel the barrier. Evidence no longer slept. Witnesses remembered. Traces persisted. Truths refused to remain buried. The town, still unaware of the precise progress, felt the change. A tension hung in the air, subtle yet pervasive, as if the earth itself held its breath in anticipation of revelation. Doors were watched more closely, conversations became measured, and for some, decades of guilt began to awaken memories they had worked hard to suppress. By dawn, the detective had a plan. A sequence of interviews, further excavation, and cross-referencing every remaining detail. Nothing would be rushed, nothing left unexamined. The cold case was moving from theory to reality, each step peeling away the layers of decades-long deception. And in the quiet moments, the detective allowed himself a rare thought. Margaret Hale, though gone, had never truly left. Every footprint, every whispered memory, every fragment of fabric now emerging from the earth was proof. She had endured. Her absence had haunted generations, but now it demanded acknowledgement. The case, long dormant, was awakening. The air was heavier that afternoon. Cedar Hollow Road seemed smaller, as if the weight of the past pressed down on the landscape itself. Trees bowed slightly in the breeze, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the cracked gravel. The detective moved slowly, methodical, aware that every step might reveal something long hidden, a truth that had been silenced for 40 years. Excavation continued near the creek bed. Sections of earth were lifted and sifted, each handful examined for the smallest clue. Tiny fragments, nearly invisible, began to emerge. Threads, soil samples, fragments of bone, traces of hair. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. The cold case, dormant for decades, was beginning to speak in fragments, in whispers that demanded attention. Meanwhile, interrogations resumed inside the local precinct. Each family member was brought in separately. They repeated their stories, defensive, precise, calm, a practiced facade. Yet cracks appeared. One paused too long, eyes darting. Another shifted nervously in the chair. Each slip, each hesitation accumulated, and the detective noted everything. In cold cases, the smallest inconsistency can become the sharpest weapon. The brother-in-law was next. This time he did not resist. His voice trembled, nearly breaking with every word. He described that night in chilling detail. The plan, the fear, the methodical way they had silenced Margaret. He spoke of a struggle, of voices raised, of panic masking the inevitability of what was to come. He admitted what the others had only hinted at. The family acted as a unit, bound by fear and loyalty twisted into complicity. Every revelation, however, led to more questions. Where had Margaret been kept? How had they avoided detection for decades? Who had cleaned the tracks, washed the truck, erased the traces? The detective followed each thread, mapping the family's intricate web of secrecy, realizing that their actions had been deliberate, calculated, rehearsed. It was not one person's crime. It was a collective, a pact of silence. The forensic lab provided its report late that evening. Biological material recovered from the soil near the creek bed matched Margaret's DNA. Decades-old evidence, now confirmed by modern technology. It was enough to establish not just her presence, but the likelihood of foul play. The detective exhaled slowly, letting the reality sink in. 40 years of silence had finally begun to crumble under the weight of proof. News of the breakthrough began to leak through the town, subtly at first. Neighbors whispered. Curiosity stirred. The once quiet street now felt scrutinized, as if the earth itself was alive, pressing against every door, every window. People began to remember things they had conveniently ignored. The strange headlights late at night, muffled voices, unexplained absences. Memory is fragile, but in a place weighted by decades of guilt, it refuses to remain dormant. The detective returned to the house, walking through rooms that had not changed much since Margaret disappeared. Dust-coated surfaces, but the air still carried a faint, indefinable tension. Every photograph on the walls seemed to observe him. Every corner felt like a witness. The house itself had been a participant in the silence, storing fragments of truth until someone had the patience to uncover them. He thought again of the children. Adults now, yet shaped irreversibly by a mother lost and a family secret that had dictated their lives. They were living proof that cold cases do not exist solely in the past. They persist, infecting memory, twisting relationships, echoing through the years until justice or revelation intervenes. Then came a lead that had gone unnoticed. An old mechanic, now retired, remembered a night when Thomas and the brother-in-law had requested a vehicle be cleaned thoroughly, not just washed, but scrubbed inside and out. Tires removed, underbody scrubbed, a request so meticulous it could only have been done with forethought and urgency. The mechanic had complied without question, never realizing the significance of that night. The detective added this to the file, the weight of each small detail accumulating into an undeniable picture. Margaret had been targeted, her life systematically erased, her absence preserved through decades of meticulous cover-ups. And the town, unknowingly, had been complicit by its silence, its assumptions, its unwillingness to question the ordinary. As night fell, the creek bed glimmered faintly under the moonlight, a silent witness to long-buried truths. Every shovel, every gloved hand, every careful examination brought the detective closer to the full story. The pieces of the puzzle were forming, not fully complete, but coherent enough to reveal a chilling reality. Margaret Hale had been taken by those she trusted most, hidden in plain sight, and remembered only through absence. The detective paused, thinking of her. The mother, sister, neighbor, lost in time but finally emerging through the persistence of truth. 40 years of silence would not last forever. The cold case was no longer cold. It was alive, dangerous, demanding answers. And somewhere, inside the walls of the house, somewhere in the hearts of those who had kept the secret, fear had returned. Not the fear of the unknown, but the fear of exposure. Because the truth had finally begun to rise, inexorable, unstoppable, unyielding. The dawn brought little relief. Cedar Hollow Road, once quiet and unassuming, now seemed alive with scrutiny, as if the past itself had awakened. Dust swirled in the morning light, stirred by wind and movement, and carried faint memories of events long buried. The detective returned to the creek bed with renewed focus. Every inch of soil, every root, every stone was a potential witness. They unearthed more fragments. Tiny shards of fabric, a button, a piece of jewelry, degraded, discolored, but unmistakably hers. Each discovery echoed through the team with a heavy resonance. Evidence, once thought lost to time, had begun to assert itself. It demanded acknowledgement. Margaret's presence, erased for decades, was asserting itself quietly but unyieldingly. Meanwhile, the family's composure frayed. Interviews that once yielded rehearsed responses now produced contradictions. A glance too long here, a hesitated word there. Small cracks widening into fault lines. The detective watched closely, knowing that guilt, even decades old, carries a rhythm, a cadence that betrays itself in the most subtle ways. The brother-in-law returned voluntarily, pale and weary. His previous disclosures had been partial. Now, under the weight of mounting evidence, he spoke more freely. He described how fear and loyalty had intertwined, how panic had overridden reason, and how decisions were made collectively, silently, with the tacit understanding that Margaret's absence would never be questioned. Every word was heavy with regret, the kind of regret that lingers when the past refuses to be buried. The detective cross-referenced these statements with old photographs, original police notes, and recently uncovered physical evidence. A pattern emerged: coordinated action, meticulous erasure, and decades of concealment. Margaret had not vanished by chance. She had been removed deliberately, systematically, with the complicity of those she trusted most. Financial records added another layer. Large cash withdrawals, obscure transactions, and sudden, unaccounted-for expenses painted a picture of careful planning. Every move, every decision, had been calculated to preserve the family's secret, to mask the absence, to ensure that no one would connect the dots. As the investigation progressed, the detective grew increasingly aware of the psychological weight carried by the surviving family members. Each one had lived under an unspoken code: protect the secret, preserve the narrative, maintain appearances. Their lives, shaped by decades of avoidance, had become extensions of the crime itself. Late that afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A neighbor, who had lived near the Hales for decades, revealed seeing unusual activity on the night Margaret disappeared. A car parked at the edge of the property, muffled voices, and the unmistakable sound of movement near the creek. Though vague, the memory corroborated fragments of the brother-in-law's testimony and aligned with the physical evidence. The detective revisited the house. Inside, the silence was oppressive. Dust-coated furniture, faded photographs, and long-unused rooms bore witness to the life Margaret had been forced to leave behind. Every creak of the floorboards echoed the passage of time, the weight of unspoken truths, the consequences of decisions made in fear. As night fell, the creek bed glimmered under the moonlight. Shadows shifted across the ground, revealing contours of earth that had once concealed secrets. Every fragment uncovered, every testimony recorded, every trace documented was part of a growing mosaic. A mosaic that, once complete, would illuminate a deliberate act of erasure spanning decades. The detective paused to consider the children, now adults, living in the shadow of their mother's disappearance. The psychological imprint of that night, the family's collective silence, and the subtle manipulations over years had shaped their lives in ways impossible to quantify. Yet now, the weight of truth began to seep into even the most carefully constructed narratives. He walked slowly back to his vehicle, glancing over the creek bed one last time. The cold case was no longer a collection of unanswered questions. It was a living investigation, gathering momentum, pressing forward relentlessly. And somewhere within the house, somewhere within the hearts of those who had kept the secret, the first tremors of fear began to show. Because truth, after 40 years, has a way of asserting itself, unavoidable and absolute. By the following morning, Cedar Hollow Road was no longer merely a street. It was a stage where the past and present collided. Every glance from a neighbor, every shutter clicking from a window, seemed to carry the weight of decades. The detective returned to the property, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight sweeping corners where dust had settled for 40 years. Every detail mattered. Every overlooked trace had regained significance. The excavation team focused on the soil near the creek bed. Small tools, brushes, and gloved hands meticulously worked through layers of earth hardened by time. Fibers, hair fragments, and tiny pieces of fabric emerged, degraded but undeniable. The cold case was asserting itself through material evidence, forcing the silence that had once protected it to unravel. Interviews with family members intensified. Hours of questioning produced subtle cracks, hesitations, repeated phrases, eyes avoiding contact. It was as though the decades of secrecy were pressuring them physically, emotionally. Each carefully constructed narrative faltered under the detective's persistent questioning. Every slip, every pause was documented. Every inconsistency became a potential key to the truth. The brother-in-law was called in once more. His demeanor had changed, pale, drawn, a man bearing the weight of decades-long complicity. He described the night in excruciating detail, voices raised, a struggle, the final decisions made in silence but with chilling consensus. The family had acted as a single entity, bound by fear and loyalty twisted into complicity. Margaret had resisted. She had fought, but each attempt to assert autonomy had been methodically suppressed. Financial investigations uncovered further anomalies. Large cash withdrawals, unexplained transactions, and purchases of cleaning supplies and other materials corroborated the physical evidence. The family had prepared deliberately, meticulously, ensuring Margaret's absence would go unquestioned. The detective noted the timing, the coordination, and the precision. It was criminal orchestration sustained over decades. The children, now adults, were brought back in. They spoke cautiously, but the detective listened for more than words. He listened to tone, to hesitation, to the way memories surfaced in fragments. Their lives had been shaped by absence, by a mother removed and a family united in silence. They remembered shadows, muffled sounds, raised voices, and instructions to remain in their rooms. They recalled a night that made no sense at the time, but now fit into a horrific puzzle. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. A retired mechanic recalled cleaning Thomas Hale's truck in the days following Margaret's disappearance. Tires removed, underbody scrubbed, interior cleaned meticulously, all at the family's insistence. A task carried out without question, once ordinary, now chilling in hindsight. The detective cross-referenced the statement with other evidence. Receipts, photographs, witness accounts. A pattern emerged of premeditated, deliberate erasure. As evening fell, the detective revisited the house. Silence enveloped him, heavy and palpable. Dust-coated furniture, faded photographs, and long-unused rooms carried the weight of absence. The house itself seemed complicit, storing echoes of events, bearing witness to decisions made in panic and fear. Every creak of the floorboards whispered decades of unspoken truths. Every shadow a remnant of Margaret's life erased. The creek bed shimmered under the moonlight. Shadows cast by trees and broken branches stretched long across the ground, accentuating the contours of earth that had concealed secrets for decades. Forensic teams carefully documented every fragment, every indentation, every trace, each piece contributing to a mosaic that was slowly forming. A mosaic revealing the calculated removal of a life. In quiet moments, the detective reflected on the children, shaped by decades of silence and manipulation. Their entire understanding of family, of safety, of truth, had been constructed atop an absence. Now, with evidence emerging and testimony unraveling, the legacy of that night was threatening to redefine everything. And somewhere inside the house, in the hearts of those who had maintained the secret, a tremor of fear had begun. A realization that decades of careful concealment could no longer contain the truth. That the past, long dormant, was waking with relentless insistence. The cold case was no longer a static file. It was alive, urgent, and demanding justice, no matter how long it had been deferred. The breakthrough came quietly, almost imperceptibly. The detective had spent hours reviewing the fragments, the fibers, the soil samples, and the scattered recollections. Then he noticed a detail overlooked in every previous investigation. A faint, consistent pattern in the soil near the creek. Impressions that suggested a weight had been carried, not simply placed or dropped. Small, subtle depressions, aligned in a line, leading from the shed to the edge of the water. A trail almost invisible to the naked eye, preserved by the stubbornness of the earth itself. He called in the forensic team immediately. Together, they traced the impressions, each step confirming what the evidence had whispered for decades. Margaret Hale had been moved deliberately, systematically, with precision. Every movement calculated, every step methodically executed. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of preservation. A family protecting its secret with unflinching coordination. The brother-in-law, under continued questioning, revealed more. Not the full truth, that would come only gradually, but enough to clarify the sequence of events that night. Margaret had resisted. She had screamed. She had fought for her life. But each act of resistance had been met with a calculated response. Silence, force, the shared understanding of what needed to be done to ensure she would never disrupt the family's carefully controlled world. Financial records and property logs further confirmed the scope of premeditation. Large cash withdrawals, expensive cleaning materials, equipment purchased specifically for tasks that no ordinary family would undertake. Removing traces, sanitizing surfaces, erasing evidence. Each transaction, once mundane, now revealed itself as part of an elaborate plan. The detective began to see the full architecture of the crime, and it was horrifying in its precision. The children, finally speaking with a clarity that decades of suppressed memory allowed, filled in additional gaps. Nights spent locked in their rooms, muffled arguments through walls, unexplained absences, instructions to never ask questions, to never mention Margaret's name. Their lives had been curated by omission, each day carefully constructed around a void, a mother erased but never forgotten. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A retired local resident, hesitant for decades, finally stepped forward. She remembered seeing a small group of family members moving under cover of darkness, a makeshift stretcher, a careful maneuvering of weight through the woods toward the creek. She had never spoken before, fearing retribution, fearing exposure. Now, with the investigation reopened, she offered her recollection. It was fragmented, incomplete, but it corroborated what forensic evidence and witness testimony had begun to suggest. Margaret had been taken forcibly, moved to a concealed location, and the crime meticulously hidden. The detective returned to the creek bed that night, flashlight in hand. Moonlight reflected off the water, shadows stretching long and ominous. Every inch of earth, every branch, every footprint that remained told a story. The cold case, once dormant, now pulsed with urgency. It demanded closure, demanded acknowledgement. The fragments of Margaret's life, once scattered and silent, were finally beginning to coalesce. Inside the house, the remaining family members exhibited signs of unease. Their carefully maintained composure faltered in subtle ways. A glance that lingered too long, a word that stumbled mid-sentence, a hesitation before answering questions that should have been routine. The detective noticed every nuance. He knew that guilt, even decades old, manifests in the smallest ways, in ways that the perpetrators cannot control. As the night deepened, a plan formed. Additional excavation, more interviews, cross-referencing all remaining evidence, leaving no stone unturned. The detective understood that this was no longer a theory. It was a living, breathing investigation, a 40-year-old truth, finally awakening, demanding reckoning. And somewhere, in the shadowed corners of the house and the creek bed, in the hearts of those who had kept the secret, fear had fully arrived. Fear that the past could no longer remain buried. Fear that the meticulous construct of decades could finally crumble. The cold case was no longer cold. It was alive, insistent, and unstoppable. Margaret Hale, erased for 40 years, was demanding to be remembered. The final pieces began to fall into place in the gray hours before dawn. Cedar Hollow Road, long silent, seemed to hold its breath, as if the earth itself understood the significance of what was unfolding. The excavation site glimmered under the first light, soil disturbed carefully, fragments aligned meticulously by gloved hands. Each artifact, each fiber, each trace of long-erased existence became a voice, a testimony from the past that refused to stay buried. The detective reviewed every recording, every witness statement, every lab report. The picture that emerged was chilling in its clarity. Margaret Hale had been forcibly removed by those she trusted most. Each family member had played a role, not an impulsive one, but a coordinated, deliberate orchestration to erase her presence and protect their own. 40 years of silence, loyalty twisted into complicity, had maintained the illusion of normalcy. That illusion had finally begun to fracture. Forensic evidence confirmed the grim reality. DNA fragments from soil, fabric, and residue matched Margaret. The creek bed, once a silent witness, had preserved the story. Impressions of weight, traces of struggle, and the subtle markers of a life taken and concealed. Time, which had seemed to favor the perpetrators, now worked against them. Modern technology and relentless investigation had forced the truth to surface. The family, confronted with the accumulated evidence, could no longer maintain their facade. Hesitations became admissions, and admissions began to unravel decades of rehearsed silence. One by one, inconsistencies compounded, revealing the meticulous choreography of that night. It was not an accident. It was not chaos. It was a cold, calculated act sustained by fear, loyalty, and a profound desire to control the narrative. The children, finally understanding the full scope of their mother's disappearance, felt the weight of a truth that had been absent for so long. Their lives, shaped by a void, now held clarity. The detective observed their reactions closely, knowing that the psychological echoes of the past would resonate far beyond the resolution of the case. Margaret's absence had shaped generations. Her truth, now emerging, would reshape the understanding of family, loyalty, and betrayal. In the town, whispers spread like wildfire. Cedar Hollow Road, once overlooked, now drew the attention of neighbors, journalists, and authorities. Memories long suppressed resurfaced. Unusual headlights, muffled voices, sudden absences, and the faint scent of metallic chemicals. The community, unknowingly complicit in its silence, now faced the reality that the past was not gone. It had been waiting, patient, for acknowledgement. The detective stood at the creek, examining the final traces. The moonlight faded as dawn arrived, revealing subtle contours in the earth, shadows where truth had lingered unseen. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every fragment told the same story. Margaret Hale had been taken, silenced, and concealed by those closest to her. 40 years of denial could no longer withstand the persistence of reality. The culmination was inevitable. Warrants were executed, arrests made. The family, once unified in secrecy, now fractured under the weight of exposure. The law, slow but relentless, finally intersected with decades of careful deception. The cold case, once dormant, was resolved not by chance, but by the accumulation of detail, persistence, and the unyielding passage of time that refused to let silence remain unchallenged. Even as the legal machinery began to move, the detective allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. 40 years of absence, 40 years of questions, 40 years of whispered doubts, and now the truth finally undeniable. Margaret Hale's story, long erased, was no longer a shadow. It had become a beacon. The cold case, solved at last, left an imprint on everyone involved. The community, the family, and the detective himself. Yet the final note lingered, haunting. The consequences of silence, the weight of complicity, the psychological toll of secrets maintained for decades. Margaret's presence, once absent, now permeated everything. The town, the house, the creek, and the hearts of those who had survived her disappearance. The cold case was solved, but its echoes would resonate forever. A chilling reminder that truth, no matter how long delayed, will always find its way to the surface. And as Cedar Hollow Road lay quiet in the morning light, the detective knew one thing with certainty. Justice, patient and relentless, had finally arrived. Margaret Hale, erased for decades, would never be forgotten again. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation. 40 years of silence, decades of absence, had finally condensed into this moment. Every seat, every desk, every flickering light seemed to hold the weight of Margaret Hale's story. The detective sat quietly, watching, notes in hand, knowing that justice was no longer a concept but a presence, tangible and unyielding. Family members entered one by one, faces once confident, now shadowed by fear. Hands trembled, eyes avoided the inevitable. Loyalty, twisted and sustained for decades, had eroded into unease. The brother-in-law, Thomas, and the others had rehearsed statements, attempted denial, but the accumulation of evidence was relentless. Each photograph, each fragment of soil, each recorded confession was a brick in the cage closing around them. Witnesses recounted memories long suppressed. The neighbor who had seen figures moving near the creek, the mechanic who remembered the meticulously cleaned truck, the children whose lives had been shaped by silence. All spoke, cautiously at first, then with increasing clarity. Every detail aligned, a chorus of truth rising over 40 years of careful deception. The courtroom seemed to shrink under the weight of decades, the air thick with tension and inevitability. The detective observed the reactions. Hesitations, tremors, a glance too long toward family members. These were the subtleties that revealed the depth of guilt. 40 years of lies had created a fragile structure. Now, with the first cracks, it was beginning to collapse. And each word spoken in the courtroom widened those cracks, made the structure tremble. Prosecutors methodically presented the evidence. Fibers, DNA fragments, impressions in soil, financial records, meticulous patterns of erasure. Every piece told the same story. The jury listened in silence, absorbing the decades of concealment, the deliberate orchestration, the family's collective decision to remove Margaret from the world and their lives. The weight of the crime, long hidden, was undeniable. Outside, the town reacted in waves. Cedar Hollow Road, once quiet, felt the tremors of history reverberate through its streets. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as neighbors absorbed the news. Whispers carried across yards. The weight of complicity and suppressed knowledge settled on the community like a fog, thick and inescapable. 40 years of assumed normalcy were shattered, and everyone felt the tremor of truth piercing their memories. The children watched from the courtroom gallery, faces pale, hands gripping seats. Their mother, erased for decades, was finally present through evidence, testimony, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Their childhoods, once defined by absence, now had context. Pain interlaced with clarity, anger interlaced with understanding. And beneath it all, a fragile thread of closure began to weave itself through the narrative of their lives. Verdicts were read slowly, deliberately. The gavel echoed like a heartbeat, a reminder that justice, however delayed, still arrives. Each sentence pronounced was both conclusion and beginning, a reckoning for the family, and a testament to the persistence of truth. The detective listened quietly. The culmination of 40 years of investigation crystallized in those words. Margaret Hale's story, once erased, had now been acknowledged in the most official, irreversible way. Even as the courtroom emptied, the weight lingered. The house on Cedar Hollow Road remained silent, shadows stretching across its faded walls. The creek bed, disturbed and studied, held fragments of a past that could never fully be restored, yet finally recognized. The detective walked its edge once more, flashlight cutting across the earth, reflecting on the persistence of absence, the impact of decades-long secrecy, and the endurance of memory. The town would never be the same. Lives had been shaped by a void, and now the void had been illuminated. Fear, guilt, and relief intertwined. Margaret's presence, once denied, now permeated every corner of the community, every shadow of the house, every ripple of the creek. Her story, long silenced, had finally resonated, leaving behind a legacy of justice, truth, and a haunting reminder that absence cannot endure forever against the persistence of evidence and memory. The detective turned away from the creek bed as dawn broke. The air was crisp, but heavy. 40 years of cold case, decades of secrets, had reached resolution. Yet its echoes, the lessons, the pain, the shadows of human loyalty twisted into complicity, would ripple across Cedar Hollow Road forever. Margaret Hale, erased for decades, would never be forgotten again. Weeks passed, but the town did not return to normal. Cedar Hollow Road remained haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories, by the weight of 40 years finally laid bare. Doors stayed closed longer, conversations carried a measured caution, and eyes met with suspicion where trust once existed. The detective drove through the street, noticing the subtle tremor of awareness in every glance, every hesitant gesture. History, once silent, now demanded acknowledgement. The house on the edge of the creek stood as a monument to absence. Windows dark, paint peeling, yet every creak, every shadow, seemed to whisper the story of Margaret Hale. Children no longer lived there. The adults carried her memory in their posture, their reactions, the lines on their faces. The detective walked its perimeter, reflecting on the magnitude of what had occurred, on the careful orchestration of a family bound by fear, and the decades of silence that had protected it. The community grappled with its own complicity, subtle though it had been. Neighbors admitted to remembering the strange lights, the muffled arguments, the sudden departures. Whispers turned to confessions in living rooms, behind closed doors, as people realized that long-ignored signs were pieces of a puzzle that had been there all along. Fear of confrontation had allowed absence to persist. Now, truth demanded confrontation. The children, adults now, survivors of a calculated erasure, carried a mixture of grief, anger, and tentative relief. The mother who had been removed, whose existence had been hidden in shadows, now occupied space in their minds and hearts. Memory, once fragmented and distorted by omission, had regained clarity. Pain intermingled with closure, and the detective recognized that this, too, was part of justice. Acknowledgement of absence, recognition of endurance, validation of the lives shaped by loss. Outside, the creek flowed silently, indifferent yet witness. Earth that had concealed evidence for decades now lay exposed, marked by meticulous excavation, by forensic precision, by the relentlessness of truth. Shadows stretched across the water in the early morning sun, a reflection of history refusing to stay buried. Nature, patient and unyielding, had preserved fragments that humanity had tried to erase. The family, fractured and exposed, faced the legal and emotional consequences. Loyalty had been tested, trust shattered, and the past laid bare in court and in confessions. Yet the detective knew, as always, that justice is not only about punishment. It is about recognition, about truth asserting itself over the weight of decades, about silence finally giving way to voice. Even as cases closed, as verdicts were pronounced, and as the town slowly adjusted to reality, a residue remained. The story of Margaret Hale persisted, echoing through memory, conversation, and the landscape itself. Her absence had shaped generations. Her presence, finally acknowledged, reshaped the town's understanding of morality, family, and complicity. The detective, standing by the creek one last time, let the weight of 40 years settle around him. The cold case was solved, the crime exposed. Justice, however delayed, had arrived. But beyond verdicts and confessions, there remained the haunting clarity. Truth, patient and unrelenting, always finds its way. Absence may endure for decades, but the evidence of life, of injustice, of human action, never truly disappears. And so, Cedar Hollow Road remained quiet, but forever altered. The past had spoken. The truth had emerged. Margaret Hale, silenced for 40 years, had returned. Not as she was, but as she always had been. A presence that demanded recognition. A story that could never again be ignored. A reminder that cold cases, no matter how long dormant, leave echoes that reverberate through time, through community, and through every life they touch. Months had passed, yet Cedar Hollow Road remained shadowed by the events that had unfolded. The houses, quiet in appearance, bore attention invisible to the casual eye. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, their conversations tentative, interrupted by glances toward the Hale property, now vacated and shuttered. Memories refused to settle. Even with the case closed, the town existed in a liminal space, between acknowledgement and denial, between relief and lingering unease. The children, adults now fully aware of the magnitude of what had happened, struggled with the residue of trauma. Memories once suppressed returned in fragments. A laugh interrupted, a creak on the stairs, the metallic tang of fear that had hovered in their rooms. They had survived 40 years of absence, yet survival brought no absolution, only the recognition of the psychological architecture imposed upon them. The detective's presence had ensured justice, but the emotional reckoning had only begun. In the town, whispers became small confessions. The mechanic who had cleaned the truck now spoke openly of his memories. The neighbor admitted to noticing the subtle movements in the woods. Others recounted oddities long forgotten. Each acknowledgement was a minor act of liberation, a reclamation of truth. But every confession also reminded them. They had all been witnesses to absence, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The past was never fully gone. It lingered in memory, in emotion, in the unspoken shadows. The house itself, abandoned, became a symbol. Windows boarded, rooms empty, yet every creak and shadow hinted at the presence of the life that had once been erased. Walkways bore impressions where footsteps had carried secrets. The creek shimmered under the sun as if it too held memory, reflecting fragments of the past for anyone willing to notice. Nature, persistent, retained evidence even when humans tried to forget. The detective returned one last time, walking the length of the creek, flashlight in hand, though daylight now rendered it unnecessary. He traced the paths, touched fragments of soil, examined the subtle contours of the earth. The cold case was solved, the law had spoken, yet the detective felt the lingering pull of unfinished echoes. Evidence had told the story, memory had confirmed it, justice had acted. But the human psyche, fragile and enduring, carried scars that no verdict could erase. For the family, the aftermath was quiet, tense, a slow unraveling of a life sustained by fear. Some sought therapy, others fled the town. Loneliness mingled with guilt, and in the silent hours, the weight of decades of deception pressed heavily. Margaret Hale, though absent for 40 years, continued to shape lives. Her story had returned, insistent, transformative, haunting in ways that justice alone could not reconcile. In the broader community, life resumed its rhythm, yet with subtle adjustments. Windows stayed closed later, doors remained locked longer, and conversations were careful, measured. The town had absorbed a profound lesson. Absence leaves a mark, silence carries a cost, and truth, once unearthed, resonates far beyond the initial crime. Cedar Hollow Road had been transformed. Every shadow, every empty yard, every creek bend now whispered the echoes of Margaret's life, demanding acknowledgement in the mundane routines of daily life. And the detective, standing on the edge of the creek one final time, felt the enduring weight of the story. Justice had been done. The cold case, patient and relentless, had been resolved. But the echoes would endure, not as headlines, not as court records, but as memory. A reminder that absence never truly disappears, that the human heart retains both the void and the story, and that even 40 years later, the truth, patient and unyielding, will always assert itself. Cedar Hollow Road remained quiet, but it was a quiet forever altered. Shadows stretched longer, footsteps carried weight, and every memory held the imprint of what had been taken, what had been hidden, and what, at last, could never be erased. Margaret Hale had returned, not as a presence in life, but as an enduring testament to resilience, to truth, and to the inexorable persistence of memory. Years passed, but Cedar Hollow Road never forgot. The town's memory had absorbed the events like water seeping into stone, subtle but permanent. Even after the trials, after the verdicts, After the echoes of courtroom gavel and confessions faded, the landscape itself seemed charged with the weight of absence. The creek, the house, the stretch of road, all bore silent witness. Shadows moved differently there. The wind whispered through the trees with a cadence that reminded the living that some stories never truly end. The children, grown into adults with lives beyond the town, carried the past like an invisible heirloom. Memories surfaced unbidden. A glance down a hallway, a sudden creak in a floorboard, a whiff of metal that stirred the old fear. Therapy, relocation, attempts at normalcy. None fully erased the legacy of 40 years of silence. Margaret Hale's absence had been formative. Her return through truth had reshaped not just their understanding of family, but their perception of reality, trust, and human fragility. Neighbors, even those who had once been indifferent, now understood the subtle signals they had ignored for decades. A door left unlocked for a moment too long, the sound of a vehicle in the distance, lights flickering late at night. Small details that, once insignificant, now carried the weight of awareness. The community had absorbed a lesson that lingered. Absence leaves traces, complicity leaves scars, and silence is never truly neutral. The detective, older now, visited the creek one last time. Dawn broke over the water, reflecting gold and shadow. He traced the contours of the earth with careful eyes, recalling every excavation, every fragment, every confession. Justice had been served, yet the human stories, the lives shaped by deceit, the weight of unspoken truths, endured beyond the law's reach. The past, patient and relentless, still spoke in whispers, in wind through the trees, in ripples across water, in the quiet footsteps of those who had survived. Some nights, the Hale house remained in his mind, its dark windows reflecting not only absence, but resilience. The creek shimmered under moonlight, a reminder of the meticulous choreography of human action, deliberate, precise, and capable of both harm and revelation. Margaret Hale's story had returned, asserting itself through memory, evidence, and consequence. The town, the family, the detective, all remained shaped, altered, haunted in subtle and lasting ways. And so, Cedar Hollow Road existed in a new reality, one where the past had weight, where truth endured, where memory demanded acknowledgement. Shadows stretched longer, footsteps carried gravity, and even ordinary moments were tinged with awareness of what had transpired decades before. Margaret Hale's absence had been absolute. Her truth had emerged. Justice had intersected with memory. Silence had finally been broken. Yet the detective knew, as he walked the creek in quiet reflection, that the echoes would persist, in hearts, in minds, in the very soil that had concealed the story. The cold case, patient for 40 years, had been solved, but its resonance would last far longer. Absence had been confronted, but it had left a permanent imprint. Margaret Hale, erased and hidden for decades, had returned as a presence impossible to ignore, a testament to endurance, and a reminder that some truths, once unearthed, never fade. Cedar Hollow Road remained quiet, but forever haunted. Shadows lingered, memories persisted, and the story, patient and unrelenting, continued to assert itself in every corner of the town. The cold case was closed, but its echoes, the whispers of absence, the weight of secrecy, the persistence of truth, would stretch across generations. Margaret Hale would never be forgotten. Decades had passed, yet Cedar Hollow Road remained a place where time felt suspended. Houses aged, paint peeled, and trees grew taller, but the shadows of that night in 1979 lingered, weaving into the rhythm of the town like an unspoken story no one could forget. Residents felt it in the quiet moments, the way wind whispered through empty yards, the faint reflection of moonlight across windows, the sudden unease in footsteps crossing gravel. The past had settled into the soil itself. The children, now fully grown, carried the invisible imprint of their mother's disappearance. Their own children sensed it too, the weight of a story half told, the absence that had shaped family history, the shadows lurking in conversations never meant to reveal too much. Trauma, memory, and resilience intertwined in ways that no therapy or distance could erase. Margaret Hale's life, removed for decades, had become the silent architect of generations. The detective, older, with lines etched by years of cases, walked the creek bed once again. He traced the contours of the earth, every depression, every remnant, each a whisper of deliberate acts long ago. Justice had been done, verdicts issued, confessions obtained, yet he felt the persistence of absence in a way only decades of investigation can teach. Evidence had revealed truth, but truth had left its mark not only on the guilty, but on everyone who had witnessed, knowingly or unknowingly, the fracture of a life. The town itself seemed suspended between memory and forgetting. Conversations that might have been ordinary now carried caution. Stories were measured, and even laughter was tinged with reflection. Cedar Hollow Road had learned, slowly and painfully, that the surface of normalcy often hides fractures, and that what is hidden in shadows can emerge when least expected. People walked more deliberately, spoke more cautiously, and remembered what they had long chosen to ignore. The creek reflected sunlight in fractured patterns. The earth, disturbed and studied, preserved its own testimony. Fibers, fragments, soil impressions, all had contributed to unraveling a carefully maintained secret. Nature, patient and persistent, had carried forward the evidence that humans attempted to erase. The detective knew that these subtle reminders would continue to resonate for generations, long after legal proceedings and confessions faded. The family, fractured irreparably, had moved or retreated. Their lives bore the enduring weight of a secret exposed. The children's perspective on trust, loyalty, and family had been irrevocably altered. Even as they built lives elsewhere, Cedar Hollow Road remained a silent reference point, a marker of absence, secrecy, and revelation. Margaret Hale's life, once denied, had become a lesson written into the fabric of every subsequent choice, every relationship, every memory. And yet, despite the resolution, the cold case left residual questions. Shadows where fragments could not provide answers. Silence where stories could not be recovered. The sense of unease that lingers when the human mind confronts deliberate erasure. Some nights, the wind through the creek seemed to carry voices from the past, and the detective, listening quietly, could almost hear Margaret's presence asserting itself in the enduring quiet. Cedar Hollow Road remained quiet, yes, but not innocent. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every subtle creak of floorboards carried the memory of absence and the echo of truth. Margaret Hale, erased for 40 years, had returned as a presence not of flesh, but of narrative, of memory, of justice, and of lingering psychological resonance. The cold case had been solved, but its legacy, the whispers, the shadows, the imprint on generations, would never fade. The detective walked back along the creek one last time, feeling the persistent weight of time and memory. Justice, patient and relentless, had been done. Truth had been unearthed. Silence had been broken. But the echoes, subtle, insistent, and eternal, would remain in every corner of Cedar Hollow Road, reminding all who lived there that absence, no matter how long, always leaves a trace, and that some truths, once revealed, are impossible to forget. Generations later, Cedar Hollow Road remained a quiet testament to absence and revelation. Houses aged, the creek shifted, and trees grew thick along the winding paths. Yet the story of Margaret Hale persisted like a pulse beneath the surface. Children, grandchildren, and neighbors still sensed it in subtle ways. The way the wind carried an unfamiliar chill, the echoes of footsteps long gone, shadows that seemed to linger longer than they should. The past had seeped into the very geography of the town, permanent, insistent, unyielding. Those born after the events inherited memory in intangible ways. Lessons whispered by parents, hints of caution in conversation, and the heavy silence surrounding the Hale family shaped their perception of morality, loyalty, and secrecy. Absence became tangible, almost physical, as though the ground itself remembered. The detective, long retired, knew that truth leaves fingerprints not only on evidence and law, but on psyche, on community, on every life touched by the echo of what was deliberately erased. Occasionally, visitors would stumble upon the Hale property, now abandoned, doors boarded, windows darkened. Few dared linger. Some swore they felt an inexplicable unease. Cold air where there should have been warmth, a fleeting reflection of a figure that was never there, a whispered memory carried in the rustling of leaves. The land held memory like sediment. Time had not erased it, only layered it with decades of silence. The community itself carried the weight. Local children heard cautionary tales not fully explained. Adults reflected on the thin line between ignorance and complicity, and everyone who walked Cedar Hollow Road felt the subtle presence of a story unresolved in perception, if not in law. Margaret Hale's absence had been absolute, yet her truth had been so forcefully restored that it became part of the landscape of human consciousness there. Even the detective, walking the creek in solitude one evening, sensed a persistent resonance. The earth retained its witness, the water reflected stories untold, and every shadow seemed to whisper fragments of the past. 40 years of secrecy, decades of suppression, had left a mark stronger than time itself. Justice had been done, but the echo of absence, the weight of deliberate erasure, and the unrelenting presence of truth remained. For the family, generations would carry the imprint of choices made in fear. The children, their own children, and those yet unborn inherited a complex legacy. Awareness of fragility, the cost of silence, and the enduring power of revelation. Margaret Hale had returned not as a living presence, but as an indelible force, a reminder that truth, however delayed, persists through memory, through community, through every act of acknowledgement or omission. Cedar Hollow Road would never again be simple. Shadows stretched longer, conversations carried caution, footsteps were measured. Memory and geography were fused, absence and revelation intertwined. The cold case, solved decades ago, continued to assert itself in subtle, inexorable ways. Margaret Hale's story had become more than fact. It had become a presence, a caution, a haunting melody running through generations. The detective paused on the creek bank, the water rippling at his feet. Justice, patient and relentless, had intersected with human memory. Truth had been unearthed. Silence had been shattered. Yet, in the subtle movements of shadow, in the weight of wind, in the lingering tension of human consciousness, the story remained alive. Margaret Hale, erased for 40 years, had returned in every whispered memory, every careful step, every shadow stretching along Cedar Hollow Road. And so, the town lived on, forever altered, forever haunted. A quiet place where the past refused to stay buried, where absence left an eternal imprint, and where the persistence of truth was an unyielding presence, shaping lives, shaping choices, shaping the very soul of Cedar Hollow Road. The cold case was closed, yes, but its echoes, patient, insistent, and eternal, would never fade. Margaret Hale would never be forgotten. Decades stretched into generations, yet Cedar Hollow Road remained marked, an indelible landscape where the past refused to dissolve. Houses aged, paint peeled, creek waters shifted courses, but the story of Margaret Hale lingered as if it had seeped into the soil itself. Children and grandchildren, those born long after the events, sensed the story in instinctive unease. In the weight of footsteps crossing gravel, the cadence of wind through trees, the lingering shadows at dusk. The absence of one life had become the presence of countless memories, woven into the fabric of the town. Even outside the family, the community remained subtly altered. Conversations were cautious, laughter tempered by memory, and glances carried weight where innocence had once prevailed. Every generation learned, not only of a crime solved decades too late, but of the fragility of trust, the danger of silence, and the subtle, persistent presence of truth. Margaret Hale had been erased from life, but her return through evidence and acknowledgement had ensured that her story became a permanent lesson in morality, vigilance, and human complexity. The detective, long retired, returned occasionally to the creek, a solitary figure tracing the paths of evidence, shadows, and memory. The earth, scarred yet enduring, still held fragments of deliberate acts, subtle yet telling, as if the land itself refused to forget. Every ripple of water, every leaf shifting in the wind, seemed to carry echoes of what had been hidden for decades. Justice had been served, but its resonance was psychological, moral, and perpetual. The family, fractured irreparably, bore the long-term consequences in ways no courtroom could quantify. Decisions made in fear and complicity rippled through generations. Trust fractured, relationships strained, and lives forever shaded by the knowledge of past deception. Children had learned too early that loyalty can be twisted, silence can harm, and truth, when suppressed, can grow into a force far larger than the original act. Margaret Hale's life, removed for 40 years, remained an invisible but unyielding presence in all their choices, memories, and fears. The town itself became a living archive of the cold case's impact. Even long after verdicts and confessions faded into history, Cedar Hollow Road retained the tension of decades. Shadows stretched longer, footsteps carried weight, windows reflected unease, and the air seemed to hum with quiet recollection. Newcomers, unaware of the history, would feel the subtle heaviness, the sense that some truths had been buried and then revealed, leaving the very atmosphere charged with memory and consequence. Margaret Hale's story, once silenced, had achieved a permanence beyond law or record. It became legend, whispered and acknowledged, shaping the moral and emotional landscape of the community. Every schoolchild learned, indirectly, that absence leaves a mark, that silence can compound into decades of unacknowledged truth, and that the persistence of evidence ensures that nothing is ever truly erased. Her presence, though not living, endured in every shadow, every creek ripple, every cautious glance along Cedar Hollow Road. And the detective, reflecting on the passage of time, realized that the measure of justice is not only in verdicts, confessions, or courtroom drama. It is in the persistence of truth across decades, in the imprint on communities and generations, in the awareness that absence, however long, leaves a trace that shapes lives in profound, irreversible ways. Margaret Hale, erased for 40 years, had returned not only as evidence but as a force, enduring, instructive, and haunting. Cedar Hollow Road remained quiet, yes, but it would never again be innocent. Shadows stretched longer, memories endured, and the story of Margaret Hale persisted. An eternal echo in every house, every creek bend, every footstep. The cold case was resolved, but its lessons, its reverberations, and its presence were eternal. Margaret Hale would never be forgotten, her story forever inscribed in the very soul of the town, and in the consciousness of every generation that came after.